Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm Brandon Kravitz, along with our resident fantasy basketball expert, Nick Whalen. On the pod today, we will discuss the latest news, suspensions, shutdowns, and firings. A truly wild time in the NBA as we wrap up the season. Nick, this always feels like such a weird time in the league, varying degrees of motivation to win, but then you throw in the Taylor Jenkins firing, and it just feels like especially peculiar. And maybe it's like this every year whenever there's a prized number one at the top of the draft. Teams just get way more squirrely at the end of the year. And I think we're still getting used to how teams navigate wanting to be in the play-in and that whole motivation as well. So there's just a lot going on right now, especially the bottom tier of the league.
Oh, yeah. We have a very defined bottom 8, I guess I would say. Although, I mean, San Antonio is really only like one game up on the Portland Trailblazers season long. But, it feels like Utah, Washington, Charlotte, New Orleans, Philly, Brooklyn, Toronto, San Antonio. Like those are the big 8, the teams that you're concerned about betting just about every single night. And I will say, full disclosure, we're recording this. As you can tell, Brandon is in a hotel room at the NFL owners meeting. So the things you do for this pod, Brandon, I appreciate it. We're recording this at like 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night. So like right as games are tipping off. So if anything crazy happens, we'll obviously talk about it in game. But if there's anything later tonight that we missed, that is why. But no, you're right. It's been really difficult from a betting perspective. It's tough from a fantasy perspective. Pretty much every league I play in is wrapped up at this point. I think our keeper league at RotoWire goes through game 82, but that's pretty much decided. The RotoWire Stake League finally wrapped up last night, which is excellent. I no longer have to like sweat out every injury report that comes through because that is a weekly lineup lock league. So if you lock in Giannis on a Monday and he misses games on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, you're out of luck. So there's a lot of that going on this time of year. But I do wonder, like with Toronto specifically. I was just doing the RotoWire NBA betting show on Sirius XM before this with Alex, and like is Toronto at a point now where they're basically locked into like the 7th worst record? They're 3.5 behind Brooklyn. They're 3.5 up on San Antonio. It's like, did these teams start playing it straight a little bit more down the stretch, or are we too far gone?
I mean, they're 5 games back. What do they have? Probably just doing some quick math, about 6 games left on the season. So it would be a long shot to say the least, especially when you consider teams like Chicago is playing really well right now. And
until last night, yes.
Well, right. But I mean, still overall, they've been a much better team lately than what we had become accustomed to with the Chicago Bulls. And for by the time most people listening to this, there's going to be a result in that game. Those two play each other tonight. I'm on the Bulls -4 tonight. Really like that one.
Should be a bounce back for Chicago. You can't play any worse than they did last night. Like that was in contention for like the biggest lopsided result of the entire year.
And I think it kind of goes back to your original point. I don't trust that the Toronto Raptors really have their foot on the gas pedal at this point. There's no reason for them to just because you don't have the E next to your name in the standings doesn't mean that you think you have a realistic chance of actually making the postseason.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is we just saw this last year. Like the Atlanta Hawks jumped up like 8 or 9 spots, maybe even more to get the number 1 pick. It's like I understand you want to maximize the odds. These front offices, you got analytics people in there, and I don't say that derogatorily. I'm not a math guy. I haven't taken a math class since I think junior year of high school. So I'm just kind of on the outside of that conversation. But I understand the logic of, okay, if you can get yourself a 14% chance at the number 1 pick versus a 12.5 or 10.5 or 7.5% chance, yeah, you want to maximize it, but it's not guaranteed. It's not the NFL. It's not guaranteed. If there's no incentive necessarily to be the single worst team. And I feel like somebody needs to inform the Utah Jazz of that, inform Washington, Charlotte. I mean, Utah.
Yeah, you don't get any extra points for this. I mean, it would really, if you think about it, and I'm not a math major either, but if I had a coin or maybe if I was to roll a pair of dice.
Sure.
And I were to say, okay, you have a 14% chance to win this roll. I have a 7% chance. You'd feel a little more confident than I would, but it's not like you'd be like, well, this locks in the victory.
Right.
And that's essentially what we're talking about. The Toronto Raptors, as it stands right now, have a 7.5% chance of locking in the first overall pick. That is not that much worse than what we're talking about with these top teams that have been at this all year long. I mean, I know that it's double the number, but still, the Jazz have been trying to do this since game 1 of the season, and it's really not that different.
I hope next year is different for the Jazz. We talked about that a little bit last week with Barutha. Actually, that was on Monday. I don't know. It was literally like 24 hours ago. It all runs together this time of year, but
it doesn't feel like a Tuesday. I'm with you on that.
It's like the last couple of years, if you drafted Lauri Markkanen, I'm so sorry. John Collins has been in that boat as well. Walker Kessler. It's like all these guys have been pretty good on a per game basis, but they end up playing like 58 games tops. Like at some point, the Jazz are gonna have to start trying. Hopefully, that's next year. We'll see who they end up getting in the lottery, but you are right. It's definitely different this year when there is a top prize like Cooper Flagg. I mean, even the 2, 3, 4 guys off the board probably would have been easily the number 1 pick a year ago. So I think that does incentivize teams. So one thing we did talk about, and this was yesterday, I remember this on the pod with Alex, was Cooper Flagg's like fantasy potential. So if you want to hear about that, we went like 10 minutes plus talking about Flagg and what the expectations will be. We talked about landing spots, again, all from a fantasy perspective. What I would like to know, Brandon, is where do you want him to land from a fun perspective, a watchability perspective, a development perspective? Like where would be realistically the most fun landing spot for you?
I kind of want to see absolute chaos, and there's part of me that wants to see him land in San Antonio. It would not help his fantasy prospects. I think if he were to land in a place like, I think about Washington. If he's in Washington, he's everything. He can be the Nikola Jokic of that team. It all runs through him. It would not all run through Cooper Flagg on a healthy San Antonio Spurs team, but I think they would instantly be a top 5 team in the West. Easy.
I don't know. Right. I don't know if do you think he's going to be that good right away?
Well, I think he can be that good if he doesn't have to be the guy. If he can he's so good at everything. If he can just come in and be a supercharged role player at the beginning of his career, I think he's going to shine year 1. If he has to go in and save the dying Wizards organization, I think he's going to look a little rough around the edges. But that's why I kind of want to see that. A place like Portland would be fun, but the idea of the NBA being able to market, hey, here's your Thursday night game. It features Victor Wembanyama and his new teammate Cooper Flagg. They would be salivating at that, and I think it would be a lot of fun to watch. I like watching Cooper Flagg play. I think he's an aesthetically pleasing player, and Victor Wembanyama is still, I miss watching the guy. Him going down was not only a disappointment for my big money fantasy league. It was also a disappointment because not being able to watch him, and he's just so unique in what he does. And they have De'Aaron Fox. We forget about that too.
Maybe you could sell me on this top 5. Maybe
top 5. I thought that I was being conservative saying top 5.
No, you're right. I mean, they never really had a chance with Fox and Wembanyama together. Okay,
and Stephon Castle taking another leap into year 2.
Yeah, I mean, a starting 5 of Fox, Castle, Vassell, Flagg, Wembanyama. That's pretty juicy. That's pretty juicy. I think you're right from a fantasy perspective that Utah, Washington, even Charlotte, those that probably maximizes, his game to game stat potential. But I also think, one of the comps for him has been Kawhi Leonard. And obviously he's a lot more developed than Kawhi was, at this age. And, Kawhi played multiple years in college, totally different story. But I see the parallels there. I don't think it's a perfect comparison, but there's also an argument to be made that if Kawhi is drafted by the Hornets, and not the San Antonio Spurs, I think that development story could have gone a lot differently. So I think I would almost rather see Flagg go into an instantly competitive situation than I would, be the only guy on the Washington Wizards. That'd be good for the Wizards franchise for viewership purposes, I suppose. But New Orleans would be really interesting to me. I hate to say it, but even Philly, it's a competitive situation. I have no idea what to expect from Joel Embiid.
I just would hate that for him because they've been
they wouldn't deserve
lost at sea. They wouldn't know what to do with him. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, Toronto would be fun. They already have wings and whatnot, but I think you're right. San Antonio, that 7, 8, 9, Toronto, San Antonio, Portland, all those would be fun. It gets pretty
where did you guys land on his fantasy prospects? Because I'm very curious to see what he looks like in the NBA. My only criticism, and it's not even really a criticism of Cooper Flagg, is if I were explaining to somebody that hasn't watched him play, what
Yeah.
is his one identifiable quality that makes him the slam dunk #1 overall pick and a guy that likely is going to be good right away? There's not one thing. It's not like Victor Wembanyama's shot blocking and his ability to handle the ball, where he looks like a guard, not someone who's 7'4".
Right.
Every star player, for the most part, has that one thing that makes them great, and then they're good at other things as well. Cooper Flagg is good at everything. He's just really good at everything. And I feel like it is tougher to project how that type of player fits into a system where he's asked to be the guy and what that looks like statistically for our world in fantasy basketball.
Right. And that's part of the reason that I don't love like the Washington idea, because I think that could be ugly early on. I don't think he is. And this is a big debate going on too. It's like, does he develop? Do you try to develop him like a Jason Tatum? If you're looking for a guy with like similar body, I guess, is he operating? Is he operating in the pick and roll, or is he the guy setting the screen? And I think depending on where he lands, you could have different answers. I think one thing that does separate him is that he is very coachable. He seems to be open to anything. There's a reason he's good at everything. He works on his game. He's super intense. And, that could be something that is tough to value in real life, tough to value fantasy wise. But like, there's no doubt in my mind that Cooper Flagg will like maximize his ability as an NBA player because of the way he works. You also forget that he turned 18 like 3 months ago, so I think there's still plenty of development coming here. I think the 3-point shot was a question coming into Duke, and he's been shooting like 36, 37%. We saw the passing on display in that Arizona game. I think Alex was a little bit higher on him in terms of rookie year fantasy value than I was. I'm just skeptical of any rookie outside of Wembanyama. I don't think you're going to have to burn like a first or second round pick on Cooper Flagg. It is a little Zion-y though, because there's going to be someone in your league who's like, oh, Cooper Flagg, I know him, I want to draft him. You didn't have that with any rookies a year ago.
His ADP is going to be round 2.
You think it's going to be that high? I would not take him that high. There's no way I would take him that high.
It doesn't mean that you should do it, but I think there are going to be enough people and enough leagues, like you said, that get all caught up in the hype.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, I would start thinking about it in like, I don't know, round 5. And maybe I'm just that much lower on it. Like, there's just not that many rookies who finish as top 50 guys. It doesn't really matter what your position is, right? And like, I think one of the interesting outliers of the last few years is like Walker Kessler. But that was just because he was rebounding and blocking shots at such a high level. And I don't like, what would we look at for a stat line for Flagg in year 1? Like on average, it would be 16 points, 6 or 7 rebounds, 3 to 5 assists. If he can give you a block and a steal per game on top of that, then maybe we're talking.
Like, unfortunately, you don't get points in fantasy for your player taking a charge. I feel like that's one of the things that he does best is he can get himself into position defensively, and players have a really hard time going around him.
Yeah. I mean, for years, Ersan Ilyasova was the #1 overall pick in my charge only fantasy league. It was a cheat code. It was almost like Ohtani in fantasy baseball.
That's why you're a lifer, Nick.
Yeah. All right. Let's hit a couple questions here from the chat. Then we'll tell you about our sponsor, Rebet, and we'll start talking about the players who came through for us, the players who did not come through for us. One of those players, I will tell you, this is not a question here from Anthony. He says, Fred VanVleet is buns. That man is buns. He will go 2 for 12 any single night, and he did it again last night against the Lakers. I don't understand how he is viewed as the player that he is. I agree with you. Justin says, do I drop Kyle Filipowski for Adam Bona? I think you have to think about it. Filipowski started 0 of 8 last night, ended up scoring a little bit late in that game, but he's been pretty up and down. It depends if Yabusele misses more time. That kind of supercharges Bona's potential, but given the blocks production, I think you'd have to think about it. It as always depends what you need. Filipowski doesn't really give you much defensively. Every now and then he'll give you a steal or a block here and there, but more often than not, he's giving you zeros. He does rebound. He doesn't really hand out assists. He will take a bunch of threes. But if you need defensive stats, I think I'm totally fine with that. Aaron also says, do I drop Payton Pritchard to fill up a spot on my roster tonight left by Cat? Roster is maxed out. You can think about it. It again depends on your situation, depends how dire it is. In terms of what Pritchard has the rest of the week, they play Miami tomorrow. They play Phoenix on Friday, Washington Sunday. So you got 3 more games out of him. I mean, he was bad last night as well. Really needed him to come through in a league. He did not. Not a great matchup against Miami, but pretty good matchups against Phoenix and Washington. So he says he's up by 130. If you're up by 130 here, you're probably safe either way. Depends, of course, who you're picking up. but 3 more games of Pritchard to me is pretty appealing.
We're at that point in the season where you got to do what you got to do. These questions don't make any sense a month ago, and you're just you're just fighting to get to the finish line at this point. So if you feel like it's something you need to do to secure the win, but I think to Nick's point, you're probably good given the sizable lead that you have.
All right, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today, Rebet. March Madness is here. In fact, the Final Four is coming up in just a few days, and if you're looking for a way to get in on the game, it's time to check out Rebet, the ultimate social sportsbook and casino platform with over 100 leagues on the sportsbook and 24/7 live dealer casino games. Rebet is striving to give users an experience they have not had elsewhere all March long, even into April. Rebet is rolling out daily promos, making it the ultimate month of exciting offers for their fans. And right now, for a limited time, Rebet is matching your first purchase up to $100 in Rebet cash when you use the promo code RotoWire. Download Rebet today on the App Store or Google Play. Enter the code RotoWire. Start playing with your promo funds. It's time to play, predict, and experience the madness only on Rebet. All right, Brandon, we have a couple suggestions already here in the chat, but if we're talking about guys who have won us leagues, who've helped us stay competitive, guys who's lost us leagues, we got one from Aaron. He says, Jrue Holiday is my vote. This would be on the negative side of things, of course. And I assume the Fred VanVleet comment also had something to do with that. Yeah, very weird year for Jrue Holiday. Obviously the Celtics have been great again. He missed some time here and there. Celtics have been a lot more aggressive in building in rest for their veterans, but big time statistical fall off. We saw it last year too. His numbers aren't that far off of what he was doing a season ago, but it kind of felt like that was the baseline and there was potential for those numbers to rise. And it got even worse. The 3-point shooting, that's the big thing that jumped out to me, Brandon. Shot his lowest percentage from 3 since 2018.
Well, he's getting older. This is a guy that's been in the league for a while now, and it
All right, we'll work to get Brandon back momentarily. Appreciate anybody watching along live. This is what happens when we do these pods from hotel rooms, but the show will go on. We'll get him refreshed and back as soon as we can. As far as the guys who came through for me this season, Dyson Daniels, obviously that's a big one. Had him in Razzball, didn't end up winning that league. Certainly not going to end up winning it, but was competitive there. And getting Dyson Daniels at his ADP, getting what you get out of him in a category league for steals, I think that's one of the obvious ones. I cannot wait to see where Dyson Daniels is drafted a year from now. We're talking about a guy who is quite literally a first-round value in terms of total value on the year. You can find that tool over at RotoWire. Part of it, obviously, is he's barely missed any time. He's on pace to play 76 games. So that's been big. But, overall, it's been a pretty healthy season for a lot of stars around the NBA. So it's not like that big of an outlier compared to years past. I do have a good question here from Anthony. He says, what do we do with Anthony Davis? Can we trust him or can we trust to take him in the top 10? I don't know if I would do it. As much as I love AD, man, when he's right, when he's healthy, he is absolutely one of the 10 best fantasy players in the NBA. And that's saying a lot given the depth of the league right now. In terms of per game value on the season, he ranks 5th behind Jokic, Wembanyama, SGA, and Luka Doncic. He's also played 47 games so far and will probably finish around 50 on the year. Unfortunately, given the history with Davis, it's not like this is just a one-time thing. This has happened so many times over the years. People will take him in the top 10. I'm not sure I will be the one to do that. Talk a little Anthony Davis here, Brandon, and whether or not you would take him in the top 10.
I just don't know how you could. And I always deal with this with Davis and projection of what to do with him in the draft. To me, he's the player, and I think this is a good formula to have in any sort of form of fantasy baseball, in football. If one of those players falls to me in round 2, I've already secured that star player on my roster. Absolutely. In round 1, you are planting your flag saying that this is the player that's going to carry me to a championship. I just don't have that level of faith in Anthony Davis. And I hope that all of that came through on the video podcast.
It's coming through. It's coming through. We appreciate you hopping back in. Other guys who really came through for me. I mentioned my Razzball League hosted over at the NFBKC. That's where I have Dyson Daniels. I also have Trae Young. Was high on Trae Young this year. Did not get as much Trae Young as I was hoping to get. But yeah, I think kind of buried in the Trae Young narrative of, oh, you can't really win this with this guy. He locks you into the play-in, is the fact that he is still a really, really, really good fantasy player. Even if the 3-point volume isn't as much as you would like. I think we think of Trae Young as like the Steph Curry type of player, and he's under 3 threes per game, which in the modern NBA is not really all that many, but 11.5 assists, over a steal per game. Field goal percentage, not great, but does kind of make up for it with the free throw shooting close to 90%. And, a guy who despite his body, despite his frame, tends to stay healthy.
Yeah, and on my list, I mean, for me, it's mostly injury related. I just there were 2 things that I did too heavily this year. One of them is going to make you cringe because I think I overdrafted these rookies, not because I overvalued them, but because I felt like they were undervalued because people weren't excited about this rookie class, and so at the end of drafts, I would just load up on these rookies because nobody wanted them. And it turns out that some of these guys were okay. I got some decent play out of Risa Shea and Alex Sarr, and I even had a nice little run with Zach Edey, but most of it just fizzled out and the upside just simply wasn't there. But I am drunk on Zion Williamson, and I've finally learned my lesson. I am no longer going to be a Zion guy moving forward. I have to operate with the same level of paranoia that all of you do, because the flashes of brilliance simply aren't enough. It's not worth the headache. Another guy that I invested in this year, which started to pay off at the end of the year, but it was too little too late, was Kawhi Leonard. I was big on him, and I love when he's out there. I've obviously loved the way that he plays, and this year it does seem like they're turning things around. I love the Clippers odds to represent the Western Conference at 30-1. But in terms of fantasy, just too many headaches over the course of the season when it comes to these lineups. And if you have to set, like most of the leagues I play in, you have to set your lineup at the beginning of the week. It's an absolute nightmare with these guys that don't play.
Yeah, Kawhi, I was just thinking about this the other night. I've been a LeBron sympathizer for much of my life, and like I thought by now I would need a succession plan. It's like, all right, what player do I attach myself to? As a young child, it was Tracy McGrady, and then kind of transitioned. I think it would be Kawhi for me. Like I think he is my favorite player to watch right now, which he's not flashy, and that is something that I look for. I love the behind the back passes. I love, like the way that LaMelo Ball plays. Like that's how I like to think I would play if I were for some reason in the NBA. And Kawhi is the opposite of that, but just so lethal, man. But in fantasy, you can't do it. I mean, the guy's played 31 games on the year. I mean, he's been awesome for 2 straight months now. I think this is the closest that he's looked to old Kawhi in a while, but the value equation just really doesn't become worth it because he's going to struggle to finish like inside the top 175 in terms of total value. And you're not getting him that late. You still have to burn a semi-premium pick on Kawhi Leonard. And when you do the math, it just doesn't work out. I mean, I think there are certain builds, certain strategies where maybe it does make sense to take that risk. If you're in auction and everybody's staying away, maybe you can do that. But it's really tough, especially, coming into the year, knowing that he was going to miss, a big chunk of time. I will say one guy who has worked out for me pretty well, Brandon, partially because, his ADP has really gone down the last couple of years, is Rudy Gobert. Not my favorite player to watch by any means, not my favorite player to root for, but still underrated, I think, in fantasy. And, per game, he's like barely inside the top 100. But as far as big men go, he almost never misses time. He actually missed more time this season than he typically does. And he's, still a top 65 guy. The rebounding is invaluable. The shot blocking has not been what it was during his Utah years. I don't think that's ever really coming back, although I kind of thought it might this year, not playing alongside Cat. But I still think Rudy Gobert, who in a lot of leagues, you could get him in the 70s and the 80s. It's not one of those guys who, he's going to beat his ADP by 50 spots, but nobody really wants to draft Rudy Gobert anymore. And I think he's still really effective.
For sure. I mean, he's got a very specific game, and he's still, when he's out there, he's usually the biggest guy on the floor, and he prioritizes defense and rebounding over everything. Those are key categories in fantasy. So all of that makes sense. I have a name that I want to tee up, but there's one other point on the injury front that I wanted to bring up because I was fantasy football obsessed way before I was ever fantasy basketball obsessed. These are two completely different mindsets, I think, when it comes to injuries and injury paranoia. In football, you can protect yourself with injuries. If you love a running back, you just draft their backup, and you hope that the starter doesn't get hurt because the backup doesn't have as much upside, but you will still get replaceable value. There is no handcuff fantasy basketball. You have guys that step up, but there's no clear 1-for-1 of if Kawhi gets hurt, this guy is going to be a star in fantasy. It doesn't work like that. And so you don't have this, you can't draft the same sort of injury protections in fantasy basketball. So you have to operate at a higher level of paranoia than you do in other sports.
So Ant chimes in and says, Nic Claxton screwed me this year. Yeah. I didn't end up with really any Claxton, not necessarily because I was avoiding him. I think there was just a little bit of a rush to grab Claxton, and like he's played enough games that he should not rank where he does. He's played 66 games and he's still like barely inside the top 100. I think he's just kind of gotten dragged down by everything that's going on with the Brooklyn Nets. The shot blocking hasn't really been there. The rebounding hasn't been all that high volume. So yeah, that's a good one. Because we never really talk about the Nets on this show. There's just not much going on there in the fantasy world. But yeah, if you invested in Nicholas Claxton, that is not coming through. I will say for the second straight year, like Derrick White is going to beat his ADP by quite a bit, and not going to be as much as last year, but he's right now on pace to finish well inside the top 30. I think Austin Reeves, that's a big one. And we've seen two different iterations of this Lakers team where he's the third guy behind LeBron and Davis. He's the third guy behind LeBron and Luka, and he's still putting up huge numbers on a night-to-night basis. I mean, what a find he's been for the Lakers. I think that's been a good one. And then if we want to stick positive here, Brandon, took a lot of shots at Zach LaVine this year, and it actually worked out. He hasn't been great lately. I was watching the Kings last night against the Pacers, and he like barely touched the ball in the second half. Malik Monk was just going wild, 1 of 12 from the field. So like there are nights where there are kind of too many mouths to feed, but he was incredible for the Bulls over the first half of the season. Obviously didn't necessarily foresee that specific trade coming, but LaVine has stayed healthy and he's kind of looking like he's back to old Zach LaVine, and right now inside the top 40 on the year.
Drafting all sorts of Bulls paid off. Josh Giddey's had a nice statistical season. Kobe White picked up where he left off. We felt like maybe he was a blip last year. He went on that hot run and helped a lot of people secure playoff berths, but he's been a viable fantasy asset, especially down the stretch. Yep. There's two Clippers that deserve a shout out here, and you deserve a shout out for one of them, because every year, the last couple of years, you've said, no, James Harden is a good, solid pick. And he's had a fantastic season, and he's been healthy pretty much all the way through. Yep. And how can you go this whole segment without mentioning Norman Powell? At 31 years old, who the hell saw this coming? This guy, over the course of the last couple of years, 13 points per game, 16 points per game, he shot up to 23 points per game, one of the best scorers in the NBA. And this was a value find in drafts. And, I mean, maybe even a guy that you grabbed off the wire early in the season. So he deserves it was probably the best pick for me over the course of the season was getting Norman Powell on my rosters.
Yeah, those are both really good ones. You don't really think of Harden as like a riser or anything like that, but he's been great. He's third in total value. I mean, he's another one of those guys, kind of like Gobert, where it's like, even if you don't love the player, he's super effective in fantasy and he never misses time. He's missed 3 games on the year. He's always going to, at this point in his career, he's going to rate higher in total value than per game, but he's been great on a per game basis. I thought you were going to mention Zubac as a Clipper, right? I mean, I think that's another one. I mean, Zubac has been just amazing, man. And he was the guy that I wish I had more of. We talked about that earlier in the season. We're like, I was beat the drum on Zubac. I loved him. I was like, this is the year I'm going to get a bunch of Zubac. And I think I only have like 2 shares. Just wasn't willing to back up my own words. But like he ranks inside the top 25 in 8-cat in total value. Another guy who never, ever misses time. And on a per game basis, he's still a little bit further back, but we're still talking top 60, right? I mean, 16.5 points, 12.5 rebounds, 1.2 blocks. He gives you marginal assists, 2 to 3 assists as a center. That's not bad. 62% from the field. The free throw shooting is bad, but it's not bad enough that it totally tanks your team. I think we really probably should have seen this coming more, and maybe we should have seen the Powell thing coming more with Kawhi missing so much time early in the season. Ant in the chat says,
I think to that point,
go ahead.
Well, I think this is something to think about moving forward, because we tend to sleep on these guys. They're not big household names. They don't have flashy play styles. But if you play with a point guard, especially one that loves the pick and roll, who's the roller? Who's the guy that is benefiting from that the most? Trae Young is one of the best passers in the league statistically. Jalen Johnson was a superstar before he got hurt. And then you have James Harden, one of the other best passers in the league, and Zubac has been a star this season in fantasy. So this is one of those things that we need to keep in mind when we're building rosters out.
So Ant says, is Amen Thompson the top surprise this season? He's definitely in the running. He's in the running. I mean, I still think for me it's Dyson Daniels. Like, not that we didn't know that this potential was in there, but I don't think anybody was like, hey, he's going to be a top 15 guy. The steals have just been beyond our wildest dreams. And I mean, Amen he's been fantastic. You look at his season-long numbers, it almost doesn't do justice to what he's been doing for the last couple of months. He had a couple just wow plays even last night against the Lakers. And yeah, he's somebody you're going to have to pay up for next year. I think everybody's going to want a piece of Amen Thompson, the defensive potential, the scoring potential. I mean, he almost feels to me like their most important future piece, which is saying a lot, because I love Şengün. I'm still relatively high on Jalen Green. And I mean, that guy, if you're ranking, under 23-year-old assets in the NBA, I think he is way out there. Anthony says, I'm not touching Zion. I'm not touching Embiid, Paul George, Fred VanVleet, Brandon Ingram, or any Jazz or Hornets players. Yeah, I'm with you on all those. I always still hold a soft spot for Ingram, but I think this year's that was the final straw. I would add Terry Rozier to that list. He might not even be in the league next year at this point. I don't know. He's not even in the rotation for the Heat, but there were a couple drafts where I was like, oh, nice. I got Terry Rozier, late in the draft, thinking I got a steal, and what a disaster that was.
Well, Terry Rozier is the kind of guy that'll bet on himself. So, take that into account as well. Yeah, I'm trying to think of who else I would add to that list. I like we're just throwing whole teams in there. I don't mind that. Yeah. You do want to see what they look like going into the year. Some of these can kind of turn things around, but I wonder about the brother. We talk about Amen Thompson, and there's a lot of confidence there. Are we then going to be too low on Ausar Thompson because he's dealt with his own issues of staying on the court? These guys are still twins with a very similar athletic profile, and the Pistons are on the rise. I think that Ausar might end up being the forgotten brother and could provide some value next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of who could beat their ADP more next season, it's probably him, because I think Amen is going to go high enough that it's going to be tough for okay, what's the second act? Whereas with Ausar, I mean, he's only played more than 25 minutes 16 times this season. And in those games, and we're only talking 28 minutes per game, like he's barely played 30 minutes in any game this season. 14 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2.8 steals, 0.7 blocks. So yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to say if you swap those guys, kind of like a parent trap situation, that Ausar could be doing something pretty similar to what Amen is doing in Houston.
We're not even sure that hasn't happened already. Who's to say that they haven't swapped jerseys at one point? Just kind of tried it out.
That's possible. It's very possible. I mean, they're identical. I don't know that I could look at those guys and tell them apart. All right, we got a couple questions in the chat, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Brandon, I know you're busy out at NFL owners meetings. Aaron says, I have Fred VanVleet out of desperation. That's the right way to phrase that. In a head-to-head league, he isn't that bad. Should I move on from him? As always, depends on who your options are. I mean, the thing is, he's been so bad for most of the last couple of weeks that if you followed Fred VanVleet, especially over the last few years, he's now due for a couple good Fred VanVleet games where he goes 6 of 11 from beyond the arc. I mean, the shot selection is brutal. I watched him. It felt like anytime he was in the lane, he was just getting swatted. He wasn't even getting shots off against the Lakers last night. I don't understand it. But chances are you probably can't do a whole lot better. Kenny says, I need stocks. Do I drop Huerter for Ausar for finals week? He didn't have any stocks last game with Tobias and Cade out. He didn't. But, I wouldn't read too much into one game. I mean, again, the minutes are really frustrating with Ausar. He has seen a little bit more tick, 32, 34 minutes these last 2 games. Obviously, Cade will be back at some point. They're also playing Minnesota. That is, 1, a team that has a lot of size and a lot of physicality, and 2, a jump shooting team. They just don't get blocked very much. They're not a high turnover team, so it's not a great matchup for that. the game before he had 4 blocks and 2 steals, so if he gave you that over a 2-game span combined, you would be thrilled. So look, if you need stocks and your options are Kevin Huerter or Ausar Thompson, you got to go with Thompson.
Absolute lock. Could not agree more. That's a decision that has to be made. And keep in mind, and you got some really good ball handlers on that Minnesota Timberwolves team. That's a tough team to pick the pockets of.
Yeah, no question about that. All right, we will cut this thing off. Brandon, appreciate you scrambling to make this happen from the hotel. Love the artwork in the background. Looks like a very comfortable couch that you're on.
I've been sitting on this couch for the last 7 hours.
Oh my. That is dedication.
Been a lot right here has been going on.
Dedication to the craft. Yeah. I know your Orlando Magic, by the way, are about to tip off against the Spurs. So we'll let you go watch that. I got to go check in on the Bucks. Really appreciate you being able to do this, Brandon. We'll have one more episode coming for you next week, taking you through the final week of the regular season. We'll mix in a few episodes throughout the playoffs as well, but we'll keep them coming here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. And of course, you can find this in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts.